A man in an orange jumpsuit gave away his last meal to a stranger bleeding on a prison floor. He didn't think twice. He didn't ask for anything back. He just knelt down, pressed his own shirt against the wound, and said,
"Stay with me, you're gonna be all right."
That decision cost him 72 hours in solitary confinement. It made him an enemy of the most dangerous crew in the cell block. But 10 years later, that one act of kindness walked through the courtroom door wearing a judge's robe. The man Byron Young saved? He didn't just survive. He became the person holding Byron's future in his hands. One tray of food, one moment of courage when nobody was watching, and it changed everything for both of them. This is that story. But before Byron Young ended up behind bars, his life was already a battle, just a quieter one. Memphis, Tennessee. Orange Mound, one of the oldest and roughest neighborhoods in the city. The kind of place where streetlights stayed broken for months because nobody cared enough to fix them. The kind of place where people worked 2 jobs and still couldn't make rent. Byron was 30 years old, tall, quiet, built strong from years of hauling freight. He worked the overnight shift at a warehouse on the south side, loading pallets, taping boxes, shoulders screaming by dawn. He'd drive home in his old Buick with the windows down. The AC had been dead since last summer, and try to sleep before the neighborhood noise made that impossible. But before he slept, he cooked. Every single day, Byron made dinner for his mother, Denise. She'd get home from her janitorial shift at the hospital around 5, tired, feet swollen, back still aching from a surgery 2 years ago they were still paying off. Byron would have something ready. Rice and beans most nights, fried chicken if he'd picked up extra hours, sometimes just eggs and toast. They ate together, always, no exceptions. Then he'd pack her lunch for her second job, night shift at a laundromat 6 blocks away. He'd walk her to the bus stop because the street light on their corner was out, stood there until the bus came. Every night, rain or cold or heat. Denise would say, "Baby, you don't have to wait." Byron would say, "I know," and he'd stay anyway. That was Byron. He didn't talk about love. He showed up. What most people didn't know, what you'd never guess from a man who hauled boxes all night, was that Byron was sharp. He read everything. History, biographies, philosophy. Saturday mornings at the public library, he'd come home with a stack of books balanced against his chin. He never finished college. Dropped out after 2 semesters to pay for Denise's surgery. But he never stopped learning. He kept a journal, small handwriting in a composition notebook. Quotes he liked, ideas that hit him, questions he couldn't answer yet. And he had a dream. A quiet one, the kind you keep to yourself because you're afraid people will laugh. Byron wanted to open a bookstore, a small community shop in Orange Mound. A place where kids could come after school, where people could sit and read without being rushed out. He saved for it, $40 here, $60 there, in a shoebox under his bed. He carried a book everywhere, a dog-eared copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, the story of a man wrongfully imprisoned who waits years for justice and gets it. Byron had read it 4 times. The spine was cracked, pages soft from handling. He kept it in his back pocket like a talisman. He didn't know yet how much he was about to live that story. On weekends, he coached neighborhood kids in basketball. No uniforms, no league, just a milk crate nailed to a telephone pole. Byron was patient and firm, never raised his voice. Some of those kids had fathers in prison, some had none at all. Byron wasn't replacing anyone. He just showed up, again and again. But there was one thing he couldn't fix: his sister, Ruby. She was 24. Bright smile, quick laugh, the kind of energy that lit up a room. But lately the light had been dimming. She'd been dating a man named Derek for 8 months. Derek was charming when he wanted to be. Loud, confident. Always picked up the check and made sure everyone noticed. Byron didn't trust him. Something in Derek's eyes. Something in the way Ruby flinched when Derek raised his voice. Even when he was just telling a joke. One Sunday, Ruby came to dinner wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer. When she reached for the salt, her sleeve pulled back. A bruise wrapped around her wrist, dark purple, shaped like fingers. Bumped into a door, she said quickly. Byron looked at her, didn't say a word. Neither did Denise. The silence at that table was louder than any argument. That night, Byron sat on his bed and wrote one line in his journal. I can't let this keep happening, but I don't know how to stop it without making everything worse. He didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question was going to cost him the next 10 years of his life. And it started with a phone call on a Thursday night. Ruby was crying, could barely speak, but Byron heard enough. He grabbed his keys, told her to lock the door, said 3 words, I'm coming. He didn't think about the consequences, didn't weigh the risks. He just moved. That was always Byron's problem, and his greatest gift. He showed up, no matter what. What happened that night would cost Byron Young the next 10 years of his life. But in that moment, he wasn't thinking about years. He was thinking about his sister. The rain came down hard. The kind of Memphis rain that turns streets into rivers and makes headlights useless. Byron drove with both hands locked on the wheel, wipers slapping back and forth at full speed, but barely keeping up. The old Buick hydroplaned twice on the way to Ruby's apartment. He didn't slow down. His phone sat on the passenger seat. Ruby had stopped talking 2 minutes ago. The call was still connected. He could hear her breathing, short, shallow, scared. That sound alone was enough to make his chest feel like it was caving in. Ruby's apartment was in a complex off Lamar Avenue, 2nd floor. The stairwell light was out, had been for weeks. Byron took the stairs 2 at a time in the dark, one hand on the railing, rain dripping off his jacket. The front door was open. Not unlocked. Open. Like someone had slammed it so hard it bounced back. Byron stepped inside. The kitchen light was on. Everything else was dark. He could hear the rain hammering the windows. And then he saw her. Ruby was sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet. Blood ran from a cut above her left eye. Her hands were shaking. Her shirt was torn at the collar. She looked up at Byron with an expression he would never forget. Not fear exactly. Something worse. Exhaustion. Like she'd finally run out of reasons to believe things would get better. Derek stood 3 feet away, breathing hard, fists clenched, a broken plate scattered across the floor between them. His eyes were wild. Not drunk, but close to it. The kind of rage that feeds on itself. "Ruby," Byron said. His voice was steady, calm, almost gentle. "Come on, let's go." Derek turned. "Who told you to come here?" "Ruby, let's go. Now." Byron didn't look at Derek. He looked only at his sister. He reached out his hand. Ruby grabbed it. He pulled her to her feet slowly, carefully, keeping his body between her and Derek. They were almost at the door. Almost. Derek grabbed a bottle off the counter. Glass. Heavy. He swung it. Not at Byron. At Ruby. Aimed right at the back of her head. Byron saw it. Instinct took over. He shoved Ruby behind him with one arm and pushed Derek back with the other. Hard. Harder than he meant to. Derek stumbled backward, lost his footing on the wet floor, and cracked the back of his head against the edge of the kitchen counter. He went down. The apartment went silent. Just the rain outside and the sound of Byron's own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Derek lay on the floor, groaning, bleeding from the back of his skull. Ruby was behind Byron, sobbing. Byron knelt down, checked on Derek. He was conscious, bleeding, but conscious. Byron exhaled, stood up, took Ruby's hand again. "We're leaving, now." But they didn't get to leave. A neighbor 2 doors down, an elderly woman who'd heard the screaming, had called the police 12 minutes ago. The squad car pulled up before Byron reached the bottom of the stairs. 2 officers, flashlights, hands on holsters. They came upstairs and found Derek on the kitchen floor, blood pooling under his head. 8 stitches worth of damage. Ruby was hysterical, crying too hard to form sentences. Derek, now sitting up against the wall, pointed at Byron and said 5 words that changed everything. "He attacked me. No reason. The neighbor hadn't seen anything inside the apartment. She only heard shouting and a crash. Ruby tried to speak. She told them Byron was protecting her, but the officers saw a calm man standing over a bleeding man, and the story wrote itself. Byron didn't resist. He put his hands behind his back before they asked him to. The cuffs clicked shut in the rain. Ruby screamed from the doorway, "He was helping me! He was helping me!" The officer put his hand on Byron's head and guided him into the back seat. The DA charged Byron with aggravated assault. His public defender was carrying over 40 active cases. They met twice before trial. Twice. Derek lied on the stand. Ruby testified, trembling, tearful, desperate. But the prosecution called her unreliable, emotional, inconsistent. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty. Sentenced to 15 years. At sentencing, Byron stood still. He looked at Denise in the front row. She was sobbing, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep it doesn't make sound at first. Byron looked at her and mouthed 2 words, "I'm okay." He wasn't okay, but he refused to break in front of his mother. In the transport van, he reached into his back pocket for his copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. It was gone, confiscated during processing. He closed his eyes and leaned his head against the cold metal wall. He'd lost everything now. His freedom, his savings, his dream. Everything except who he was. And where they were taking him, that was the one thing that would matter most. Byron had been inside for 8 months when a new face showed up at Riverbend. Someone who clearly didn't belong. But we'll get to him in a moment. First, prison. Riverbend Correctional Facility. Medium security. Gray concrete walls that seemed to swallow sound. Razor wire curled along every rooftop like metal thorns. The air always smelled the same. Industrial bleach and something metallic underneath that Byron never could identify. The intake hallway had a mural on the wall, painted by inmates years ago. A sunrise over a river, soft oranges and golds bleeding into blue water. Most people walked past it without looking. Byron didn't. He stopped the first time he saw it and stared for a long moment. A guard nudged him forward. But Byron kept that image in his head. Somebody in here once believed in mornings. That was enough. Byron learned the rules fast. Keep your head down. Don't pick sides. Don't owe anyone. Don't let anyone owe you. He worked in the kitchen, mopping floors before dawn, ladling food onto trays during meals, scrubbing pots until his hands cracked. He didn't complain. He read whatever the prison library had. He wrote in a new journal, cheaper paper now, pen instead of pencil, but the same small handwriting. Some inmates respected his silence. Others tested it. A man named Briggs, thick neck, dead eyes, ran a crew on B Block, bumped Byron's shoulder in the yard one afternoon. Hard, deliberate. Byron looked at him, said nothing, kept walking. Briggs watched him go. He didn't try again. Not because Byron was big, because Byron wasn't afraid. And that confused men like Briggs more than anything. 8 months in, a Tuesday. Byron was in the kitchen scraping trays when he heard the other workers talking. "New CO starting today. Some kid. Looks about 12 years old. Fresh meat." Laughter. Byron didn't laugh. He just kept scraping. The new correctional officer's name was Ethan Crawford. 22 years old. Sandy blonde hair cut short. Thin build. Nervous eyes that moved too fast, scanning every corner like he expected something to jump out. He was fresh out of a criminal justice program at a small college in Kentucky. His father, Judge Harlan Crawford, had wanted him to go straight to law school. Ethan said no. He wanted to understand the system from the inside first. Noble idea. Terrible timing. On Ethan's 3rd day, he was assigned to B Block during a shift change. Alone. A staffing error that should never have happened. The corridor was empty. The cameras in that section had been broken for 2 weeks. Maintenance request still pending. 3 inmates cornered him. Briggs and 2 others. They didn't want anything specific from Ethan. He was a symbol. Young, white, nervous, wearing the uniform. That was enough. The first hit came from behind, a fist to the back of his head. Ethan stumbled forward. The second hit caught him across the jaw. He went down. Then the kick started. Broken nose, cracked rib, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. Ethan curled into a ball on the concrete floor, arms over his head, making sounds that didn't sound like words anymore. Byron was being escorted back to his cell from the kitchen. His escort officer was 10 steps ahead, around the corner, talking into his radio about a schedule change. Byron heard it before he saw it. The sick, dull rhythm of boots hitting flesh. A sound that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. He turned the corner. Ethan was on the floor. Briggs was standing over him. 2 others beside him. Blood on the concrete. Blood on Briggs's knuckles. Byron stopped. Every survival instinct he had, every rule he'd learned in 8 months, said the same thing. Walk away. This is not your problem. Getting involved means solitary, means enemies, means added time, means risk you cannot afford. He looked at Ethan's face, bloodied, swollen, eyes barely open, terrified. And in that half second, Byron didn't see Ethan Crawford. He saw Ruby, on the kitchen floor, blood above her eye. That same expression, not fear, but something worse. The look of someone who's run out of people to count on. Byron stepped forward. He didn't throw a punch, didn't raise a fist. He walked between Briggs and the body on the floor and stood there, feet planted, shoulders square, eyes locked on Briggs. That's enough. His voice filled the corridor, calm, low, final. Briggs stared at him. You got no business here, young. Byron didn't blink. I said that's enough. Silence. 2 seconds. 5 seconds. 10. The 2 other inmates looked at Briggs, waiting. Briggs looked at Byron, measuring, calculating. Byron wasn't part of any crew, but he was respected. Hitting him would start something much bigger than a hallway beating. The escort officer's radio crackled around the corner. Footsteps, shouting, backup called. Briggs stepped back. The 3 of them scattered like shadows. Alarm sounds. Byron dropped to his knees beside Ethan. The kid was shaking, full body tremors, blood bubbling from his nose, one eye swelling shut. Byron pulled off his thermal undershirt, the one warm layer he owned, and pressed it against the gash on Ethan's head. Hey, look at me. Stay with me. Ethan's eyes focused on Byron's face, barely. You're gonna be all right. Just breathe. Keep breathing. Medical arrived 4 minutes later. They lifted Ethan onto a stretcher. As they carried him away, Ethan's hand reached out, fingers trembling, and grabbed Byron's wrist. Just for a second. Then they took him through the double doors. Byron stood in the hallway, blood on his hands, blood on his undershirt, shirtless in a corridor that was 58 degrees. The guards took him to solitary, standard procedure. 72 hours in isolation for involvement in an incident. Didn't matter that he stopped the violence. Rules don't care about reasons. 3 days alone in a concrete box. No books, no journal, just a cot, a toilet, and the sound of his own breathing. When Byron came back to general population, Briggs and his crew watched him from across the yard. Cold eyes. But they didn't approach. Something had shifted. Byron had made an enemy, but he'd earned something else too. A quiet respect that spread through the block like smoke. 2 weeks later, Ethan returned to duty, bandaged, walking stiff, reassigned to cafeteria detail, lighter work while he healed. Byron gave a small nod. That was it. No speech, no grand gesture, just food, shared by a man who had almost nothing, with a man who needed it. This became their quiet routine. Weeks passed. Every time they crossed paths in the cafeteria, Byron made sure Ethan ate. Sometimes it was food, sometimes just a nod that said, "You're okay." Once, Byron slid a worn copy of a James Baldwin essay collection across the counter. Ethan looked at it like someone had handed him a life raft. They never had long conversations. They didn't need to. Something had been established on that bloody corridor floor, something that didn't require words. Ethan Crawford tried to repay Byron. But Byron wanted nothing, and that's exactly what made Ethan unable to forget him. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in the yard. Recreation hour. Most inmates were playing cards or walking laps along the fence. Byron sat alone on a concrete bench, reading a water-damaged copy of Frederick Douglass that the library was about to throw away. Ethan approached him. Out of uniform protocol, a correctional officer shouldn't be having personal conversations with inmates during rec time. But Ethan didn't care. He'd been carrying this weight for weeks and couldn't hold it anymore. He stood in front of Byron, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. He looked like a man trying to say something enormous, but only having small words to work with. "I never thanked you," Ethan said. Byron looked up from his book. "You don't need to." "I do. What you did, stepping in like that, you didn't have to. You could have kept walking. Nobody would have blamed you." Byron closed the book slowly. "Somebody would have." "Who?" "Me." Ethan swallowed hard. He sat down on the bench, leaving space between them, the way you do when you're not sure if you're welcome. He stared at the ground for a moment. Then he spoke again. "I want to do something for you. I can talk to the warden, get you a better work detail, library full-time instead of kitchen rotation. Maybe even put in a word about your behavior record for when parole comes up. Whatever you need, just name it." Byron, Ethan, they sat in silence for a long time. The yard noise continued around them. Shouting, basketballs bouncing, a guard's radio crackling. But between the two of them, it was quiet. Then Ethan reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small coin, bronze, slightly larger than a quarter. On one side, a family crest. Simple, old-fashioned. On the other side, 5 words engraved in small letters. "Justice is memory with courage." Byron looked at the coin, turned it over in his fingers, felt the weight of it, heavier than it should have been for something so small. He read the engraving, read it again. "Justice is memory with courage." He didn't understand the full meaning yet, wouldn't for years, but something about those words settled into him like a stone dropping into still water. "You sure?" Byron asked. "Please, just hold on to it." Byron nodded, slipped the coin into his pocket. That was the last real conversation they had. 3 weeks later, Ethan Crawford transferred out of Riverbend. He put in for reassignment, then resigned entirely. Not because he was afraid, though he had every right to be, because Byron had shown him something. That the system looked different depending on which side of the bars you stood on. And Ethan decided he wanted to stand on a different side entirely. He enrolled in law school that fall. Byron didn't know that. He just knew the nervous kid with the sandy hair was gone one morning. No goodbye, no explanation, just an empty post at the cafeteria entrance. Byron put the coin in a small cardboard box under his bunk, next to his mother's letters, next to a photo of Ruby. He didn't think about Ethan Crawford much after that. Life inside had a way of shrinking your world down to what was directly in front of you, but he kept the coin. Every night, before lights out, he'd open the box and turn it over once in his fingers. Justice is memory with courage. He still didn't know what it meant, but he held on to it anyway. Years passed. Byron had almost forgotten the name Ethan Crawford. Almost. But something kept pulling it back. A small bronze coin that never left his box. 4 years went by inside Riverbend. 4 years of concrete and routine and the slow, grinding sameness that eats time without you noticing. But Byron didn't let it eat him. He got transferred from kitchen duty to the library. It happened quietly. Officer Terrence Watts, a veteran guard who'd been watching Byron for years, put in the request himself. Watts was a tall black man in his 50s. Didn't talk much, didn't smile much, but he saw things. And what he saw in Byron was something rare. One afternoon, Watts stopped by the library cart while Byron was shelving books. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You're the best man in this building, young, and you shouldn't be here." Byron didn't respond. He just slid a book into its place on the shelf. Watts nodded like that silence confirmed everything he already believed. Then he walked away. Byron built something inside those walls. Not a business, not a life, but something. He started a literacy program, teaching other inmates to read. Some of them were in their 40s and had never finished a full book. Byron was patient with them the same way he'd been patient with the neighborhood kids and the basketball hoop. No judgment, no rushing, just showing up. At the 8-year mark, Byron applied for parole. Denied. The reason was bureaucratic, a technicality in his original sentencing guidelines, a paperwork problem, not a character problem. But the result was the same. Another year, maybe 2, maybe more. Denise cried on the phone, that quiet, exhausted kind of crying that's worse than screaming. Byron pressed his forehead against the wall of the phone booth and said, "Next time, Mama. We'll get it next time." He meant it. He had to. That same month, a news segment played on the common room TV. Some of the inmates were watching a basketball game. During a commercial break, a news anchor mentioned a young judge in eastern Tennessee making headlines for criminal justice reform, pushing for shorter sentences, reviewing old cases. The name was mentioned, but Byron wasn't watching. He was in the corner, reading. He didn't hear the name. Not yet. 2 weeks later, Ruby visited. She looked different, healthier, steadier. She'd enrolled in community college. She told Byron about an article she'd read. "Some new judge is pushing for sentencing reform. Real change, B. Maybe it'll help you." Byron smiled. "Maybe." That night he opened his box, took out the coin, turned it over in the dim light. Justice is memory with courage. He still didn't know who Ethan Crawford had become, but the answer was closer than he thought. The day of Byron's second parole hearing arrived, and the man who walked through the courtroom door changed everything. 2 years had passed since the first denial. 2 years of waiting, reading, teaching, breathing. Byron was 40 now. His hair had started graying at the temples. His hands were rougher. His eyes were quieter. But his back was still straight. He still carried himself like a man who hadn't given up. Because he hadn't. Officer Watts wrote a letter of support. 3 pages, single-spaced. He described Byron's character, his literacy program, the way other inmates looked up to him. He sealed it in an envelope and handed it to Byron's public defender personally. "Make sure they read every word," Watts said. "Every single word." The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. Byron was up at 5. He shaved carefully, put on the cleanest version of his jumpsuit, pressed flat under his mattress the night before. He opened his small box one last time, looked at the coin, looked at the photo of Ruby, looked at his mother's latest letter, the handwriting shakier now than it used to be. He put the coin in his pocket. First time he'd carried it outside his cell in years. The hearing room was small, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. A long wooden table at the front. 3 parole board members already seated. 2 men, 1 woman, all middle-aged, all wearing expressions that said they'd done this 1,000 times before. Behind Byron, in the gallery, Denise. Older now, grayer, thinner. She held her Bible the same way she always had. Both hands, knuckles tight, lips moving silently. Ruby sat beside her, steadier than she'd been in years. She held Denise's hand and didn't let go. Byron sat in his chair, hands on the table, breathing slow. He'd rehearsed his answers in his head for weeks. He was ready. Then the side door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped into the room. Younger than the other board members, early 30s. He moved with a confidence that didn't come from arrogance. It came from preparation, from discipline. He carried a leather folder under one arm. His shoes were polished. His tie was straight. He sat down at the center of the table, opened his folder, clicked his pen once. Then he looked up. Byron's chest locked. The air left his lungs like someone had pressed a hand flat against his sternum. The sandy blonde hair was shorter now, professional. The thin build had filled out, broader shoulders, a steadier frame. The nervous eyes were gone, replaced by something calm and measured. But the jawline, the way he tilted his head slightly when he read, the way he held his pen, between his index and middle finger, not his thumb. Byron knew that face. Not from a courtroom, not from television, not from any place that made sense in this room. He knew it from a concrete floor covered in blood. From a pair of terrified eyes looking up at him while he pressed his only warm shirt against a wound. From a cafeteria line where he'd scraped half his food onto a stranger's tray. Ethan Crawford. Judge Ethan Crawford. Ethan looked at the file, read the name printed on the first page. His hand stopped moving. The pen hovered above the paper for just a half second, but Byron saw it. That tiny freeze, that fraction of a moment where the professional mask cracked. Ethan looked up. Their eyes met across the table, across 10 years, across a universe of change. Something moved behind Ethan's eyes. His jaw tightened. He blinked twice, slow, deliberate, like a man forcing himself back into control. Then he straightened his folder and cleared his throat. Nobody else in the room noticed. Not the board members reviewing their notes. Not Denise whispering prayers behind Byron. Not Ruby staring at the back of her brother's head, willing him strength. But Byron noticed. He saw everything. And in that moment, his hand moved instinctively to his pocket. His fingers found the coin, smooth, warm from years of handling. Justice is memory with courage. Now he understood. The hearing proceeded. Ethan was professional, measured. He asked Byron standard questions: how he'd spent his time, what programs he'd completed, what his behavioral record looked like, what he planned to do upon release. Byron answered steadily. He talked about the literacy program, about the inmates he'd taught to read, about wanting to take care of his mother, about the bookstore, the dream he'd carried for 10 years in a place designed to make you stop dreaming. The other board members nodded, took notes, standard procedure. But Ethan was different. He wasn't just listening to Byron's words. He was leaning forward. His pen had stopped moving. His eyes were locked on Byron's face with an intensity that had nothing to do with procedure and everything to do with memory. Then, Ethan asked a question that wasn't on any script. "Mr. Young, can you tell the board about a moment during your incarceration where you had a choice between self-preservation and doing the right thing?" The room went still. The other board members glanced at Ethan. Unusual question, but not inappropriate. They turned back to Byron. Byron paused. He understood exactly what Ethan was asking, and exactly why. He didn't look at Ethan when he answered. He turned his head and looked directly at his mother. "There was a man who got hurt, badly. I could have walked away. Nobody would have blamed me for it. But I didn't. I stayed." He paused. "I don't say that to sound noble. I say it because my mama taught me something a long time ago. She said, 'Who you are when nobody's watching. That's the only version of you that's real.'" Denise's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled. Ruby squeezed her other hand and pressed her lips together hard to keep from breaking. Ethan looked down at his folder, wrote something in the margin. His hand was steady now, completely steady. But parole was only the beginning. What Ethan Crawford did next would change Byron's life, and an entire community, forever. The board deliberated for 45 minutes. Byron sat in a holding room, hands folded, staring at a crack in the wall that ran from ceiling to floor. He didn't pray. He didn't pace. He just breathed. In the deliberation room, Ethan recused himself from the final vote. Properly. Ethically. He told the board he had a prior connection that could compromise objectivity. But before stepping aside, he submitted his written recommendation. 3 pages, every word precise. He described Byron's spotless behavioral record, the literacy program built from nothing, Officer Watts's letter, Byron's concrete plans, not vague promises, but a real business vision, a community to serve, a mother to care for. He did not mention the hallway, the food, the shirt, the coin. He didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. The board voted unanimously. Parole granted. A guard opened the door. "Mr. Young, you're going home." Byron didn't react at first. The words floated above him, like they belonged to someone else's life. Then they settled, slowly, like the first warm rain after a long winter. He closed his eyes, pressed his palms against his knees to stop them shaking. Going home. 3 days of processing, paperwork, medical clearance, return of personal property, one small cardboard box. Letters, a photograph, a coin, a composition notebook filled with 10 years of careful handwriting. Thursday morning, Byron walked out of Riverbend. The first thing he saw was the sky, wide and pale blue and impossibly open. No fence framing the edges, no razor wire, just sky, endless and free. He stood on the front steps and stared at it until his eyes burned. The second thing he saw was the mural, the sunrise over the river, the one he'd noticed his first day. The paint had faded, edges chipping, but the sunrise was still there, still believing in mornings. He turned around, walked down the steps. Denise was waiting by an old sedan in the parking lot. She looked smaller than he remembered. Ruby stood beside her, arm around their mother's shoulders. Byron walked toward them. Denise took one step, then another. Then she was running. This woman with the bad back and swollen feet running across a parking lot. She hit Byron like a wave, arms around his neck, face against his chest. No words, just holding on. Ruby wrapped her arms around both of them. The three of them stood there for a long time. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Denise crying softly into Byron's shoulder. He was home. 1 week later, a hand-delivered letter arrived at Denise's apartment. Cream-colored envelope, Byron's name in neat, formal handwriting, no postmark. Byron opened it alone at the kitchen table. The letter was from Ethan. Not Judge Crawford. Ethan. Personal. Raw. A completely different voice from the one in the hearing room. He wrote that the night he was beaten at Riverbend was the worst of his life, that he'd wanted to quit everything, corrections, the justice system, all of it. He was ready to walk away and never look back. But Byron changed that. The man who stepped into a hallway and said, "That's enough," who gave away his only warm shirt, who shared food without being asked and refused anything in return. Byron Young was the reason Ethan went to law school, the reason he became a judge, the reason he spent his career fighting for sentencing reform. Byron read those words 3 times, steady the first time, hands shaking by the third. Enclosed was a formal proposal from the Crawford Foundation, established by Ethan, funded partly by his family's legal legacy. It offered Byron a grant of $120,000. One purpose: to open a community literacy center and bookstore in Orange Mound, Memphis. The grant covered first-year rent, renovation, book inventory, supplies, and a salaried position for Byron as founding director. Byron sat on the edge of his mother's couch, letter in one hand, proposal in the other. He stared at the numbers until they blurred. Then he cried, silently, shoulders shaking, tears falling onto the paper. For the first time in 10 years, not from sadness or relief, from something bigger. The overwhelming weight of being truly seen by someone who remembered. Denise came home an hour later, found Byron on the couch, eyes red, papers spread beside him. She didn't ask. She sat down, put her hand on his back, waited. That was Denise. She always knew when silence was enough. 3 days later, Byron and Ethan met. First time outside prison walls. Quiet coffee shop in downtown Memphis. Corner table. 2 black coffees. Ethan slid something across the table. A challenge coin. Bronze. Identical to the one from 10 years ago. "You still have yours?" Byron reached into his jacket pocket. Pulled out the original. Worn smooth. Edges soft. 10 years of handling had polished it into something that barely looked like metal. 2 coins on the table, side by side. They laughed. Quiet. Knowing. The kind of laughter shared by 2 men who understood something words couldn't carry. Then Ethan leaned forward. "There's something else. I've been looking into your case quietly." Derek recanted parts of his testimony to a parole investigator 2 years ago. Combined with Ruby's original statement and current evidence standards, there's a real path to full exoneration. Byron set his coffee down. "You serious?" "My foundation's legal team will handle it. Pro bono. Every step." Byron picked up his coin, turned it once, read the words he'd read 10,000 times. Justice is memory with courage. He finally understood, not just what the words meant, but what they could do. What started as one man's dream in a prison cell became the heartbeat of an entire neighborhood. Byron found the space 3 weeks after meeting Ethan, a vacant storefront on a main road in Orange Mound. Used to be a check-cashing place. Windows boarded, sign gone, graffiti on the roll-down gate. Most people drove past without looking twice. Byron saw something else. Bookshelves, reading chairs, a children's corner with soft lighting, a place where the neighborhood could breathe. Renovation took 2 months. Byron did most of the painting himself. Late nights, roller in hand, cheap speaker on the floor. Volunteers showed up without being asked. A retired carpenter from church rebuilt the front counter. Teenagers from the block carried bookshelves inside. Denise picked out the reading corner chairs, soft, second-hand, the kind that made you want to stay. They called it Second Chapter Books and Literacy Center. Byron chose the name, because that's what this was, a second chapter. For him, for the neighborhood, for anyone who walked through the door believing it wasn't too late. Opening day was a Saturday in October. No ceremony, no politicians, just Byron unlocking the door at 9 a.m. and a line already waiting. Kids with backpacks, parents holding toddlers, a few older men standing at the back, unsure if they belonged in a place like this. Byron welcomed every one of them. The free literacy program launched that first week. Byron designed it from what he'd learned teaching inmates at Riverbend. Patient, structured, no judgment. Some of the kids were younger siblings of the boys he used to coach basketball. The cycle continuing, but bending towards something better. Within 3 months, enrollment tripled. A waiting list formed. Parents called from across Memphis asking about a second location. Then Byron started something that meant even more. Books Behind Bars. A program collecting donated books for Riverbend and other Tennessee facilities. Reading materials, journals, dictionaries, the things that kept Byron human during his darkest years. Officer Watts coordinated from inside, making sure books reached the inmates who needed them most. The first shipment was 200 books in cardboard boxes. Byron loaded them into a borrowed van and drove to Riverbend. He parked in the same lot where Denise had waited on release day, sat there a few minutes, looked at the razor wire, then carried the boxes inside and signed the donation form. His hand didn't shake. Local news found the story. A Memphis station ran a segment, From Inmate to Inspiration. They filmed Byron surrounded by kids reading on the floor, interviewed Denise, who said simply, "My son was always this man. The world just took a while to see it." The piece went regional, then national. The Crawford Foundation expanded, funding a second location on the north side of Memphis and establishing a scholarship for formerly incarcerated individuals. They named it the Young Crawford Second Chance Fellowship. First class, 12 recipients. Ruby finished her associate's degree that spring. She joined Second Chapter as program coordinator. A reporter asked what it felt like working alongside her brother. "Byron went to prison because he stood between me and something terrible. The least I can do is stand beside him now." Then came the exoneration. Ethan's legal team had worked on the case for months. Derek's partial recantation, Ruby's original testimony, new evidence standards. It came together in a hearing that lasted less than an hour. The judge, not Ethan, he recused himself again, read the ruling. Conviction vacated. Record cleared. Byron Young formally and fully exonerated. He stood motionless in the courtroom, then turned to Denise in the front row, Bible in her lap. Tears are already falling. "It's over, Mama." She couldn't speak, but she nodded. Outside, the sun was shining. Ruby grabbed Byron's arm and laughed, full and bright, a sound he hadn't heard from her in years. Denise walked between her children, one hand on each. Steady now. Finally, steady. 2 Memphis nonprofits partnered with Second Chapter that month. A publishing house donated 5,000 books. A city council member visited and pledged infrastructure support. The dream in the shoebox had become something Byron never could have imagined. It had become real. But there's one more moment, the one that brought everyone in this story back to where it began. 1 year after opening, Second Chapter hosted its first annual community gala. It was modest. Folding chairs arranged in rows between the bookshelves. Potluck dishes covering a long table near the entrance. Mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, sweet potato pie. String lights hung across the parking lot outside, swaying gently in the evening breeze. The entire neighborhood showed up. Parents, kids, teachers from the local school, the retired carpenter who rebuilt the counter, the teenagers who were now volunteering as reading tutors themselves. Officer Watts drove down from Riverbend on his day off. He stood near the back wall in civilian clothes, arms crossed, nodding slowly, the closest thing to a smile Byron had ever seen on his face. And Ethan Crawford was there. He drove 3 hours from Knoxville, parked on a side street, walked in quietly, didn't announce himself, didn't ask for recognition. He found a folding chair in the last row and sat down, just another face in the crowd. Byron stood at the front, no podium, no microphone, just him, standing between 2 bookshelves, facing the people who had made this place real. He kept it short. "Some of you know where I've been," he said. "Some of you don't. That's okay. I'm not here to talk about prison. I'm here to talk about a painting." The room went quiet. At Riverbend, in the intake hallway, there's a mural on the wall. A sunrise over a river, painted by inmates, I don't know how long ago. Faded now, chipping at the edges, but still there. Every single day I walked past that painting, and every single day I thought the same thing. Somebody in this place, in the worst place they'd ever been, decided to paint something beautiful. Something they couldn't see through the walls. Something they couldn't prove existed outside. He paused, looked at Denise, looked at Ruby, looked at Ethan in the back row. Maybe that's what hope is. You make a picture of something you can't prove is real, and then you walk toward it until it becomes real. Silence. Then applause. Warm, unhurried, the kind that builds from the chest. Byron held up a small object, a coin, bronze, freshly minted. One side read, "Justice is memory with courage." The other side, "Keep reading. Everyone who completes our literacy program gets one of these," he said. A reminder that where you start doesn't decide where you finish. The room erupted. After the gala, the chairs were folded, the string lights turned off, the dishes washed and packed away. The building emptied slowly until only one person remained. Byron sat alone in the reading corner. Denise's chairs, soft lamplight, quiet. He opened a book, The Count of Monte Cristo, same edition. Denise had tracked it down and given it to him the day he came home. The spine was stiff. The pages were crisp and white. A brand new copy of the oldest story in his life. He read the first line, smiled. A knock on the glass door. Denise stood outside holding 2 cups of coffee, steam curling in the cool night air. He let her in. They sat together in the reading corner. Didn't speak, didn't need to. Some moments don't need words. They just need 2 people, and enough quiet to hear what matters. Byron Young didn't set out to change the world. He just shared a tray of food with a man bleeding on a prison floor. He didn't calculate the risk. He didn't weigh the reward. He just did what felt right, in a place where doing right could cost you everything. And 10 years later, that one quiet decision opened doors he never knew existed. Not just for him, for his mother, his sister, his neighborhood. For strangers he'd never meet who would walk into second chapter and find something they'd been missing. One act of kindness. No audience, no cameras, no applause. That's the kind that matters most.